Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining the video here with us. It's 2025 and we have another collaboration between Dan Clark Audio and Schiit Audio presenting that idea. Dan Clark, Jason Stoddard. Take it away, guys. Tell me what we got going on.
Cool. Well, it's, as usual, it's summer. We get bored in summer, so we come up with crazy ideas. And maybe this is one of the craziest ones yet because it includes one deal that is almost $6,000 and one that is $550. And Dan, I know people are going to ask about, like, what is this $6,000 thing? Are you guys nuts? What the heck are you doing here? So I think maybe we need to answer that. What do you think?
Well, from our point of view, the high-end market is always looking for interesting curated bundles and packages, and people are always asking us questions, what do you recommend? And we often, for our stealth product, point people to the high-end Schiit gear as having a really nice balance of power and functionality and sound that goes really well with the headphones. And so it seemed like a logical idea to try pairing together the high-end offerings from both our companies and give a curated system to people.
Oh, it does. And what's funny is I, reviewed what was on my desk at home. I'm actually here in the San Antonio office right now, but reviewed what was on my desk at home, and it is actually almost pretty much exactly that system, except I use Expanse rather than Stealth. So it's actually a Gunyer 2 and a Mjolnir 3 and Expanse right now. I'm like, okay, well, it's very close to the package, deal that we're actually talking about. Those two headphones, I believe, are the same price.
Yes.
Yeah, one's just open, one's closed. I'm not against closed headphones. I just, given one, I usually go with the open one. I'm just, I don't have to care about irritating people too much, but I totally get the value of a closed headphone.
Yeah, well, for us, we get asked, should I buy open or closed all the time? And the answer is such a complicated one, but there's always a simple part to that, which is if you are disturbed by ambient sounds or people, or you're worried about disturbing other people and being a nuisance, then you have one choice, which is get a closed headphone.
Yeah.
And in the past, long ago, in fact, the reason I got into the industry was actually that closed headphones used to my ears, just kind of suck.
Yep.
And they sounded like cups over your ears and had that really closed in feeling. And so literally the very first thing I started doing when I got interested in headphones was figuring out how to try to make closed headphones sound open.
Yeah, I remember when I heard the prototype of what actually became Stealth, and then I've heard more recently the E3. And yeah, what you've achieved with the closed stuff is, there's no downside to it. The only reason I think I'm prejudiced towards open is just it's inertia. That's where we started. Like you said, the closed stuff it was usually a compromise. Now it's not. So if you're actually looking at kind of an end game thing, this probably makes more sense. It is, there's a big number attached to it, but it is, really your flagship headphone. It is our, most technologically advanced, DAC at the moment with actually a whole different, way of doing multi-bit conversion that we don't have anywhere else. And it's a really crazy, actual Class A, headphone amp that, people have joked maybe you need to put a barbecue grill on it, over the heat sinks because it does run, quite warm. So the thing is, it's kind of like an all out, at least on our side, it's all out. What can we do, that's the best of the best in the headphone space and, in the DAC space as well, because I'm sure we'll be using that technology elsewhere. I'm pretty sure it's the same way for you on the Stealth.
Yeah, well, certainly the Stealth incorporates all of our most advanced technology and also manufacturing processes. The tolerances on it, for example, are significantly tighter. And the driver matching is the drivers pretty much come out laying right on top of each other. They have something like a quarter dB or less weighted average differential across the spectrum, which is pretty ridiculously tight. And then everything down to the internal motor structure and everything else has been highly optimized and has absolutely the lowest distortion of any of the headphones in our product line as a result of it. In fact, the distortion on parts of Stealth Spectrum are often below 0.008%, which is actually below a lot of power amplifiers.
Yeah, that is actually crazy low for any kind of transducer. It's funny. We don't have to work with mechanical tolerances so much, but if you actually look at the kind of tech we're using, Goonier's the first product we used programmable oscillators in, rather than the old VCO, VCXO like clock regeneration, and those are a lot of fun because we just had a reviewer ask about that, and he's like, "Is that like DDS?" And I'm like, "Oh, direct digital synthesis. No, that's all this." And I pointed him in the data sheet of the oscillators we're using. He's like, "Those things cost more than most DACs." I said, "Yes, they do. They're not cheap, but they actually allow us to achieve clock precision much higher than any of our older technology." So that it's one of the little things we do, and plus Goonier's modular. It's really kind of future proof, and it has fork beards, so you can use it as an EQ, you can use it as a preamp. It has nice things like loudness and stuff like that. I don't think you really need the EQ for your headphones, but hey, you add a power amp to this system, and you could do speakers as well.
Well, the Stealth in particular is remarkably close to the Harman curve through most of the spectrum. And so most people won't end up applying EQ to it. But that said, the one thing that's worth mentioning about the Harman curve as a basis for designing headphones or assessing them is that it's kind of like the Pirates Code. It's more of a guideline really than an absolute thing. It was derived as a statistical sum of preferences through a number of users. And there was a range of responses which showed that a significant percentage of people preferred, for example, more bass, and a slightly lesser percentage of people preferred less bass. And there were variations in those preferences that were a function of gender and age. Though interestingly not international locality, as I think in the past many people had assumed, including myself, from conversations with people in certain markets overseas. Had always felt like those markets had a sense of preference for example, a brighter tonality. But according to Dr. Olive's research, that isn't actually something that stood up or came out in their findings. And I think one other research group published a paper, and I'm just blanking on who it was, that validated with a sample set across international markets that there wasn't actually a tonality preference that was geo-based.
Huh. Yeah, and I know that actually most people do prefer a bit more bass because the most popular feature I think on Forkbeard has been like, I can turn on loudness, which is an actual volume-based loudness contour. And you can actually, tweak it a bit. You can apply the, more or less compensation. But people seem to really like that. And in the context of if you don't use a preamp, you can also go direct into a power amp, and you actually don't need a preamp anymore. We've had a bunch of people say, "Aren't you like cutting off your nose there because you make preamps?" I'm like, no, it's two totally different things. Our analog-based preamps that are, typically also tube or discrete are going to keep going. In fact, they have kept going just kind of as they are. We have a lot of phono listeners who go and actually, they do not want anything to do with digital as far as mixing the system. So they want a good old style analog preamp.
Especially when they're listening to their mobile fidelity.
Oh yeah. Oh boy. There's some stuff, boy. I'd love to actually have time to take a crack at a real A to D these days. There are some pretty good A to Ds out there. that are actually true multi-bit. So we could do that, but it's a tiny market, and it would be very expensive. And honestly, we have other things to focus on. Martin, our new head of digital, Mike's actually taking kind of a emeritus, role. He's enjoying his life out in the country in California, and he's at meetings every week giving input. But Martin has to deal with the new crazy, which is much more, software and firmware based. So you'll be seeing a lot of new interesting stuff coming from us, but it's not necessarily going to be in the same template that you expected.
Yeah, well, I think we probably kind of went over a little bit of the high end stuff. Want to talk about the low end?
Yeah, we should, because one of the things when we were actually discussing these packages, I know we discussed a bunch of different things, and we actually ended up with, I think, our lowest priced package ever and our highest priced package ever. So the low price one, it might be easy to dismiss, especially since we're calling it like a starter. It is a great way to get started in actually true, no compromise, high end headphone audio. That's the way I look at it. If you are, curious about this, and you want to see is there anything beyond, streaming Spotify, to Bluetooth headphones, this is a really good way to see what you got, because it is, a fully discrete headphone amp, a really good DAC, and it's one of Dan Clark's planar headphones with a lot of his tech in it. So it's a wonderful way to start, or, if you want a bedroom system or a system for the office, things like that. So it's too easy to kind of dismiss it, but, Magni, we sell thousands and thousands and thousands of Magnis, and it's popular for a reason. And a lot of people do contact us and say, why do I need anything else? And our answer is always like, if you're happy, you don't need anything else. Why spend more money? But some people like tubes, and some people like, larger products, more power, more capable, fancier looking. And in fact, we may want to talk about after this the difference between an inexpensive product and a expensive product, because we have two systems that essentially do about the same thing, but about a 10x difference in price. So, why?
Yeah, well, I think that there are two comments that I'd make about the starting out with an entry level package, and then I'll kind of touch on some of the differentials between the top and the bottom. One of the things we hear all the time, especially in the summer, is parents who have kids heading off to college and such, and they've always used mom and dad's equipment and systems, and they're looking to send them off with something that will be affordable and durable and not a dorm room theft target, et cetera, et cetera. And so summertime is a great time to put together a package that's designed to allow people to get their first system, and for people who are moving up from the free things that came with their phone or the $99 thing they bought at Best Buy or online and want to start going to what's next, having something that's within reach and accessible to anybody is such a neat thing. And I mean, I got into this business because I love audio and because I wanted to do something that made people happy. And so to me, having something that's affordable and accessible and can be touched by anyone who's curious and motivated is such a huge thing. It's part of why I come into the office every morning.
Yeah, and it's funny because we actually have up on a whiteboard in Corpus, because Tyler put it there. Tyler's like the money guy, so to speak, which kind of minimizes his role. He's a real key guy, but he likes to write things on whiteboard, and one of them is one thing I said, which is everything we make has to be fun, unique, and affordable. And so basically everything is bumped up against that template. And affordable, there's a lot, there's a wide range of affordability. I mean, there are people like, oh yeah, $5 million house, that's affordable. Well, that's not me. It might not be you. Maybe it is you. Don't know. But there's a wide range of affordability. But fun and unique are two things that we always want to have. And I'm particularly proud of Magni and Magni Unity. Magni Unity is Magni with an internal DAC, because now we can pair it up with one of your headphones, Dan, that is more than twice the cost, at retail, of the amp and DAC package, which is where it should be as far as I'm concerned. The electronics should probably take a backseat to transducer. You spend the money on the transducer because that's the difficult thing to get right, because of process control, because of all of the mechanical stuff you have to deal with. We can make 10,000 Magnis and they'll all be about the same. We can make 100,000 ESS DACs and they'll all be about the same. I suspect there's probably a little more variability even on the Aeon level of headphone, though.
Oh, sure. Mechanical transducers are never going to have the tolerances of a circuit that uses feedback.
Yeah.
It's just, that's physics for you. But that also is something where that's where the price begins to differentiate in the products as you go up. And people always ask questions like, what is the difference between a $4,000 and a $500 headphone? And the answers come across in many different ways. One will be lower distortion, another will be much tighter matching between the channels and much tighter matching to the target curve, and a higher quality of fit and finish and construction, and on and on. But just the fact of the matching alone, and the tolerances that are involved, the yields fall off a cliff when you go up to the higher end products, because we have to be so much more fussy about them.
Yeah.
And so, you kind of get diminishing returns, much like the fact that, is a $1 million McLaren 50 times better than a $40,000, let me try that math again. Is it 25 times better than a $40,000 name your car? And the answer is probably not. Maybe it's twice as fast. Maybe it handles better and is more luxurious. But there's an asymptotic curve that you go up.
Yeah.
And for people who are concerned about those incremental details and who are really obsessed about getting as close as they can to experiencing the artist's intent and extracting everything that they can from their listening experience, those details are worth it. And for a lot of other people, the details are prohibitive, or that level of finesse is prohibitive. So it really helps to cover the whole range of products and, from the top to bottom. And I can't help but remember one of my earlier work experiences when I worked in the computer industry in 3D graphics. And at the time I worked for Digital Equipment, and I was running 3D graphics marketing for the workstation division. And our primary competitor was a company called Silicon Graphics, who a lot of people now won't even know ever existed. Mm-hmm. And SGI was the dominant 3D graphics company of the day. And at that time in the 90s, their entry-level workstation was over $20,000. And our premise was that we could come up with a commodity technology workstation based on the Windows platform using the emerging 3D chips from NVIDIA and ATI, I guess it was at the time.
I remember this really well. Like I said, I had friends who worked there. So
yeah, and we launched the graphics workstations, and within 3 years, Silicon Graphics was on the ropes and declared Chapter 11. I think it was just 3 years after we really began the full assault on the market, because they just couldn't. They tried to move up market as a defense against the price pressures at the bottom by buying a supercomputer company. And as soon as they took that strategy, all their economies of scale disappeared, and their servers became cost prohibitive, and everything fell apart as a business model. So, as vendors, we have to pay attention to the spectrum of needs.
Yeah, I mean, I could not imagine being only high-end or only low-end. I want to actually properly serve both the markets. And actually doing the entry-level stuff, actually, it really does give you that scale. I mean, we are putting in an automated Yamaha SMT assembly line, like as we speak, in Corpus Christi right now. So we can do our own PC board manufacturing. We can literally take in parts and boards and have finished units come out. Right now, that is something we farm out to 3 different external providers in the U.S. So we're bringing it in-house, partially to bring costs down and partially to get even better control over process, and partially because if we have that deployed on the high volume products, it's also something we can use on the higher end products. It's a really, really big deal. It's a big investment for us, but that's the kind of thing that will allow us to keep Magni around and Fulla around and at the same or lower prices, while we also maybe we explore some higher end stuff. Don't panic, guys. We're not going to do a DAC above Yggdrasil. Don't worry. But you probably already noticed that Biggie is coming, and Biggie is more expensive than the traditional Yggdrasil, but that's because it is completely bonkers as far as the amount of tech we're packing in there. I always like to be able to point at something and say, this is where the money went, not into a front panel and not into the box, but into the actual technology on the boards.
Yeah, we faced some of those same choices, since almost at least 95% of the headphones in the market are produced in China, right? And so we manufacture in the highest possible cost location for rent and labor, which is San Diego. It's the only place I could manufacture that would be more expensive would be Manhattan or the Bay Area.
Yep. Yeah, that's about right. You are up there, and I mean,
it's not easy. So things like fancy boxes are not where the money should go. Because at the end of the day, that just is landfill. And the headphone and the technology is where everything needs to be. So we actually try to use a common packaging across all products now. And you're not going to get fancy leather boxes for a Stealth. We used to do fancy packaging for it, but the costs and economics of it don't make sense. And we're going to put the money where we need to be competitive.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Our stuff has always been, I think one of the unboxers called it the anti-Apple experience. Because we don't put a lot of money into the box. We put a lot of thought into it to make sure it arrives safely, but other than that, no, it's in the product. And there's an interesting thing. We actually did a project with an industrial designer to reimagine some of our stuff. He's an industrial design student who said, hey, can you be my mentor? And I'm like, sure. And what was amazing is he took our products and he took them forward, fairly significantly without immediately going to, well, you got to mill it from a solid block of aluminum. He was using a lot of the same techniques that we're using. And so I'm like, we can learn something from that. We can make, better looking, more, sexy products without actually breaking the bank. But yeah, I still don't want to put them in leather boxes, and I don't want to just start with an engine block sized piece of aluminum, to mill it down to 8,000 pounds of shavings and 1.5 pounds of chassis. Yeah, neither of those are really all that exciting for us.
Yeah, well, research and development is another big part of it, and an interesting one. We've started working on a project with Dr. Sean Olive of the Harman curve. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've been aware of for a long time is that the Harman curve, as we talked about earlier, is kind of a guideline concept. It shouldn't be treated as I must make everything match this exactly or I'm failing kind of target. Because people have preferences, and also there are physical differences between individuals, individual ear response, individual hearing acuity, as well as listener tonality preferences that make it so that assuming that the target is 100% literal is a bit of a mistake. And I think that when you see a lot of people publishing specific EQ curves for products or making EQ calculators that are designed only to fit something exactly to that target, you're kind of missing the mark. But that said, the target also has issues. And I think it's not super widely understood, though this has been discussed by Dr. Olive in public multiple times, is that the original Harman curve was actually developed using a very specific set of tools that are not what other people are actually using to measure headphones when they compare to the Harman curve. And specifically, that is that the curve was developed using a Gross headphone measurement system, but it was using an older microphone coupler called the 711 technology, or the model was the RA0045. And the particularly unique thing was that when they were studying the individual responses that they used to generate the target curve, they used a ear on the fixture that they made themselves using a different softness of material than the and a slightly different design that was designed to better mimic the human ear interface physically as it interacted with the headphone. And those ears will have a slightly different acoustic response signature than the commercial ears that are available from Gross. So as a result, after their research came out, Gross came out with the high frequency microphones, which almost everybody uses today, and also came out with what they call the anthropomorphic ears, which were larger and had a different response profile. And so literally, when people measure using the modern microphone and ear combination and compare it to the Harman target, there's a built-in error function that because the materials and microphones aren't the same. And as a result, Sean and I have been starting a project that we're beginning the research on now, and we'll be releasing results this fall through the AES, where we're analyzing a number of headphones, open back, closed back, high impedance, low acoustic impedance, and we will create mapping functions to go from the original Welty ear with the RA45 couplers to the half-inch high-frequency couplers and the anthropomorphic ears, and also to the 5128 system. So we'll actually be able to have a mapping of the Harman target across all the commonly used measurement platforms that will actually give a much more realistic and accurate assessment of how things comport to the standard or to the target.
Right, and like you said, that's still a blended, target. So my ears may be, harder or softer than the target, or shaped slightly differently. So I might have different preferences. But also,
that's correct. Also, there will be age-based hearing loss, that all of us face, and also the level of volume you listen at will affect it. For example, the Harman curve was targeted at 80 dB peak levels, and I've spoken to reviewers who target below 70 peak level, which is conversational voice level, at which point their perception of bass and treble will be significantly off from what the Harman is.
It's totally different, yeah. And I think what you're doing sounds extremely important, because we should all be shooting at the same target. There's been some similar discussion about how phono preamps are measured. Is it the correct way to do it? And the answer is no. You can't really just plug a phono preamp into an AP and get super accurate numbers. You really do need to factor in essentially the source impedance and the type of source you're using, whether it's moving magnet or moving coil. So there's a lot of factors in there. And are the numbers accurate? If you say, okay, I have a signal to noise of some huge number, is it accurate? Maybe not. But is it, if everything is measured with one system, is it good enough to actually make a value judgment based on that? Probably. But some of these huge numbers that you're saying, some of the huge numbers that honestly, we publish because we follow along the industry standard way of measuring things. They may not be entirely accurate. Great example is we do have a prototype solid state phono preamp that just delivers eye-popping numbers. It's above 110 dB signal to noise. at 40 dB a gain, which is, anyone who knows anything about like source impedance, Johnson noise, essentially just the equivalent, noise resistance is like, I don't know about that. But when you plug it into AP, that's what you get. Is that what we're going to claim? 100% that's what we're going to claim. But we probably should dig into that a bit more and figure out, what a real standard is. I mean, it's antique technology, so maybe it's we don't need to worry about it so much. But I think it'd be nice to have a true baseline that people can say this is how this device performs on moving coil and moving magnet, because it can be very different, and arguably you really want two stages, one for each type of pickup. So anyway,
well, it reminds me of the old joke about statistics. There are three types of statistics: lies, damn lies, or there are three types of lies.
Yeah.
How's that joke go? Oh, I'm going to flub that. Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
And statistics, yeah.
So the other one would be lies, damn lies, and specifications.
Yeah, specs. It's funny. It's fairly easy for us to have pretty hard specs because we just run about 10 samples when we're developing it, and we choose the worst, and that's pretty much what it's going to be. Yeah, mechanical stuff's totally different. So yeah, I'm sure you're chasing moving targets much more than us. Though when you're talking actually no feedback stuff like actually Milner 2. Milner 3, wow, I'm starting to forget numbers now. Milner 3, there is actually stuff you have to pay attention to, because we have to what we call ultra match, the input JFETs, which are the main gain element there. It's a single gain stage and no feedback, or you can switch feedback on if you want, but it has to be matched in no feedback. And we've joked that it's kind of like Ultra Pro Max matching, because it's so far beyond any other manufacturer is doing. We're matching to now 0.5% on all the JFET parameters, and that's what you have to do if you're going to actually get something that is the same on both channels, on a feedback free product. So
you must have a lot of bins for sorting.
To be honest, what we do is they're surface mounts, so we send them out, and they are actually matched and re-reeled in bins. So
That's cool.
Yeah, believe it or not, that's less expensive than buying the matched ones, but the matched ones are only typically 5 or 10% anyway, and it's like it's cute, it's closer, but it's not what we need. Yeah, a lot of numbers in this one. I guess Jason and Dan talk numbers, money, specs. I don't know.
Well, there's obviously a lot of people in the industry have a keen interest in specs, and it's completely understandable as to why. But I think some of it that I always make me take a double take on it, or when you get things like, there's a HD audio for headphones, for example, is one of my favorites, where you're supposed to have your headphones frequency response reach 40 kilohertz. But yeah, it's like if you're actually measuring it on any of the couplers, because of the way the coupler interacts with the headphone, you have no way to know if you're, doing that. And like, are you 3 dB down at 40 kilohertz? Are you making something wiggle at 40 kilohertz so you can do it? Literally the standard, at least the last time I looked at the HD audio spec, there was no actual spec about how you were certifying that you reached 40 kilohertz. So there are products out there that we've seen with the HD audio label on it. We put it on our rig and they're like, where's all the high end? These things are supposed to go to 40 kilohertz, but they're like rolled off by 20.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of reason why we try to avoid getting too specky, because people just play games, and especially in stuff like transducers where the parameters of measurement are so poorly defined.
Yeah, and honestly, I would argue that the parameters of measurement for essentially for electronics are still fairly poorly defined. There's a lot of concentration on some fairly limited measurements, whether they're multi-tone or single tone or whatever it is. But it's always kind of like run those things, see what numbers it puts out, and that's the game. And it's funny because anyone who uses an AP every day knows that if you change a cable, you might have 5 or 6 dB difference, in those numbers. So are we measuring the right things? I know that we have done high measuring products, and we still do very high measuring products. But when it's funny as the essentially the system price goes up, and as people become more discerning, we've actually noticed a clear trend towards like, hey, I want something without feedback. I want something, that's open loop. I want something that's simple. And it's like, those are the worst measuring things you can possibly make. So why is there an inverse correlation? What are we not measuring? I don't know. I wish I had more time to devote to that, but no one's gonna pay me to sit in the lab and figure out stuff, because let's face it, there's no great upside to that right now.
Also, the thing I think a lot of people don't appreciate is measurements like harmonic distortion were invented in World War One. And almost all the actual specifications that people use for audio electronics are literally from that era.
Mm-hmm.
And there hasn't been a ton of research about other factors that may perceptually exist that we could now measure, since we have such better equipment than we used to.
Yes.
Multitone did come along, and that was, an interesting advancement, and I think it's got a lot of relevance, to and shows interesting things. Is it the only thing that matters? No, but there's got to be more stuff out there that hasn't just quite been developed yet, that we just have to figure out how to use the new generations of tools and expand our thoughts about what we're measuring.
Yeah, because essentially going by just an anecdotal correlation isn't like good enough as far as I'm concerned. I would much rather have something that we are measuring, that we can maybe correlate to an overall preference. But then again, we may find ourselves in Harmon curve territory. Certain people like this quality that we're measuring, certain people don't. So I don't know. The only thing I can do is say, we got to make the best stuff that we possibly can at the lowest possible price. Keep it fun. That's why we typically don't go into really super crazy, complex products. Dan, you got it easy because it's like, and from that point of view, because it's like you have a headphone, you plug it in, it's you don't have to worry about it should be 5-band parametric or 10-band or 15 or 50 or whatever. What does the UI look like? It's stuff we fight every day now.
And we definitely have a smaller rule book of what it's required to be able to ship to Europe.
Oh yeah, no, that's the other thing. The Yamaha guys and us had a great conversation. They're like, lead solder is great, and I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're like, however, you will never ship anything to Europe. I said, yes, also, and I'm not all that thrilled about using lead. So we'll be doing a lead-free thing, but we're doing a super fancy lead-free with indium, so it's like lower temperature and actually more flexible. It's typically what they use in cell phones now.
Yeah, we use the lead-free stuff too, and it definitely doesn't work as well as the stuff with lead. But on the other hand, none of our employees have lead poisoning.
Yeah, and they don't have kids with 7 arms, so that's or whatever. It's not good, so let's just not use it.
Hey, a third eye would be handy.
A third arm sometimes could be very handy. Sorry, especially for soldering. But I'm not going to be volunteering for that. Yeah, because that's one of the discussions was like, do you guys want X-ray inspection? No, we do not want X-ray inspection. Luckily, that seems to be going away, and they have new devices that are. It actually literally looks like someone took Sputnik and stuck it in a cabinet, and it has like 8,000 cameras, and it basically just builds a 3D model of the board and tells you what's wrong with it like immediately. Like, okay, that's cool. We may end up adding that. Right now, we're our parts are so. I believe the term used is rustic. They're big. That we don't really need that yet. But as we get into VGAs and other crazier things, then yeah, that time will probably come. Yeah,
So
so
I
yeah,
think sounds like we probably have wrapped it up for today.
probably. Yeah, I'm excited about the solder line. It sounds stupid, but I'm excited about that. I'll be going
Oh,
down to
wait,
Corpus
next
next.
time if I get down to Texas in the future, I want to come by and see it, you know.
Yeah, it'll be up and running and producing stuff. August, yeah, I was going to say this month, but it's not August yet. In August, we'll be up and running, and producing things, and give us a few months to sort it out. But it should actually speed up things tremendously. Yeah, no, it's always fun to talk. We should do it more often. It seems like I'm sure we're both busy, like in the fall and winter, because like that's the season everything happens, and in the summer, it gets quiet. So it's like, oh, let's talk and catch up and come up with crazy deals and stuff like that. It makes sense.